It was supposed to be a normal evening. Skylar Monroe had just left her college campus, her mind still buzzing with the details of her upcoming midterm exams. A top student with straight A's and internship offers from 3 major firms, her future was a meticulously drawn map. Nowhere on that map was there a detour that ended with her in the back of a police car, steel handcuffs biting into her wrists. But that's exactly where she found herself. It had started with a simple stop at a convenience store, a small gas station on the corner of Ridgewood and Main. She had no way of knowing she was walking into a trap. She'd stopped there plenty of times before to grab a snack or fill up her tank. But tonight, the moment she stepped inside, a cold unease settled over her. 2 men loitered in the back, talking in hushed tones, their eyes scanning the room, never settling. The cashier, an older man, seemed jittery, his hands trembling as he worked. Skylar should have trusted her instincts, but she shook the feeling off, grabbed a bottle of water, and walked to the counter. That's when the world fractured. The screech of tires outside was followed by a blinding storm of red and blue lights. The front door slammed open and 2 officers burst in. "Hands where I can see them, now!" The command was a brutal crack of sound. Skylar froze, her mind struggling to catch up. The cashier and the 2 men in the back remained still. The cops weren't looking at them. Their eyes, hard and predatory, were locked on her. "Get down on the ground now," one of them barked. Skylar blinked, her heart hammering against her ribs. What's happening?" Before she could react, one of the officers, Detective Sullivan, stormed forward and seized her arm. "Don't play dumb. You know exactly what's happening. You were just seen making a drop in the back lot." Making a drop? The words were nonsensical. What?" Her voice trembled. "I just came in to buy—" "Save it. Hands behind your back." She was yanked backward before she could protest, her wrists snapping into the cold, unforgiving grip of handcuffs. Panic clawed at her throat. "Wait, this is a mistake. I don't know what you're talking about. I just got here." But they weren't listening. They dragged her outside into the chaos of flashing lights and gathering onlookers. She saw a woman filming on her phone, whispering, "This is messed up." Skylar tried to turn, to plead. "I didn't do anything." Detective Reed stepped in front of her, his expression a mask of arrogance. "Oh yeah? Then why were you spotted making an exchange with a known drug dealer out back?" He held up a black duffel bag, a bag she had never seen before, overflowing with what looked like bricks of drugs. "And guess what? We just found this." Her stomach dropped. "That's not mine." "Where did you get that?" Reed scoffed. "You were seen coming out of the back lot right before we arrived. You think we don't know what's going on?" "I was inside the store," she cried, desperate. "Check the cameras. The cashier saw me." She turned, her last hope fixed on the man behind the counter, but he refused to meet her gaze, his eyes glued to the floor. He was either scared or, worse, a part of it. "Please," she begged, "check the store footage. It will prove—" Sullivan shoved her toward the car. "Oh, we'd love to, but looks like the cameras were down tonight. Too bad." At home, David Monroe was cleaning his handgun when his phone buzzed. A single message from a restricted number. They took her. Ridgewood and Maine. Minutes later, Skylar was granted one call. She dialed her father, her voice cracking. "Dad, they're arresting me for something I didn't do, please. Help me." David set the gun down slowly. He stared at the message, his expression unreadable. Then he picked up his keys. If these men thought they could take his daughter, they were about to discover just how wrong they were. Days later, the courtroom was silent. It was not the silence of peace, but the heavy, charged stillness before a storm, an atmosphere thick with injustice. At its center sat Skylar Monroe. Her back was straight, a pillar of defiance, but her eyes betrayed the hurricane of fear and betrayal raging within. Across from her, Detectives Reed and Sullivan lounged in their chairs, their smirks barely concealed. This wasn't their first time playing this game. They had always won. The judge, an older man with a stone-cold expression, seemed bored, waving a dismissive hand whenever Skylar's public defender tried to speak. The prosecutor stood, a polished smile on his lips as he addressed the jury. "The evidence," he declared, motioning toward the black duffel bag, "is overwhelming." Skylar's throat tightened. She wanted to scream that it was all a setup, but the system wasn't designed to listen to people like her. She glanced at her mother in the gallery, tears streaming down her face. Then her gaze shifted to the back of the courtroom. A man sat perfectly still, his dark eyes unmoving, his face a mask. At first glance, he was just another spectator, but there was a cold, calculating danger in his stillness. Her father, David Monroe, was watching. He didn't flinch. He didn't react. He simply waited. As the prosecutor's voice droned on, David Monroe stood and slipped out of the courtroom. He didn't storm out. He didn't make a scene. Men like him didn't beg for justice. They delivered it. Long before he was a father, David had been a ghost, a weapon forged by the CIA into something beyond lethal. He had spent 2 decades hunting the world's most dangerous criminals, cartel leaders, warlords, corrupt politicians. He didn't just understand corruption. He knew how to dismantle it from the inside out. And now, these men had his daughter. He didn't call lawyers. He made other calls. The first was to the Department of Justice. "Check your email in 5 minutes," he said, his voice level. "You'll do exactly what I say." Click. The second, to Internal Affairs. "Reed and Sullivan, pull their records." Click. The third was a personal request to an old contact at the FBI. "I need Vanessa." Vanessa had been one of the Bureau's best undercover informants. Disguised as a journalist, she began asking questions. Why did every major drug case in the last 10 years lead back to Reed and Sullivan? Why did key evidence always vanish? Why did every black suspect they arrested receive the harshest possible sentence? The first crack in their fortress appeared. David's next call was to a hacker who owed him a life debt. "I need the store footage, the original." 10 minutes later, the file arrived. It showed Skylar never touching the bag. It showed the cops planting it. Then the hacker found something else, a hidden recording from a body cam they thought was disabled. Reed's voice laughing. "We could throw a brick of coke at any black kid in this city," he bragged, "and a jury will still take our word over theirs. It's that easy." Back in the courtroom, Detective Reed took the stand, his arrogance radiating through the room. "Ms. Monroe was acting suspiciously," he began, his voice smooth and practiced. "She became hostile and resisted arrest. We later discovered the drugs in her vehicle." Lies. Every word a carefully crafted lie. Skylar watched, her heart pounding, but then she caught her father's eye as he slipped back into his seat. He was utterly calm, and she understood. It was already over. They just didn't know it yet. The judge leaned forward, his voice dripping with condescension. "Ms. Monroe, do you have anything to say before I render my verdict?" Skylar opened her mouth to speak, but her gaze found her father's again. He hadn't moved, hadn't reacted. But this time, she saw it. The ghost of a smirk. A silent promise. This wasn't a trial. It was a performance. A scripted execution. And the actors had no idea their stage was about to burn to the ground. The script had been written long before she entered the room, the final act already decided. The walls of the courtroom seemed to shrink, closing in on her. The polished wood, the stiff chairs, the judge's cold gaze, it all blurred into a suffocating haze. She sat with her hands clasped, a desperate attempt to hold on to the last fragments of hope. Hope. What a foolish, pathetic thing to carry into a place like this. She could already see how it would play out. The jury sat rigid and indifferent, their eyes barely glancing her way. The prosecutor stood tall, his confidence radiating like heat, a man playing a game he knew he couldn't lose. And then there were the cops, Detectives Reed and Sullivan, seated at the prosecution's table as if they'd just won a championship. Their smirks were subtle, almost imperceptible, but their arrogance poisoned the air with every movement. The judge's voice sliced through the silence. "The prosecution may continue." A broad-shouldered man in a navy suit stepped forward. The prosecutor. The architect of the lies that had defined the last 6 months of her life. He faced the jury, his expression a carefully crafted mask of authority and false sympathy. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice steady and measured. "What we have here is a case of a young woman making a series of very poor choices. A case of law enforcement doing their job, protecting our communities from dangerous criminals." Skylar's fists clenched. "We have evidence. We have witnesses. We have everything we need to prove, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that Ms. Monroe was caught in possession of illegal substances with intent to distribute. There it was. The lie wrapped in a perfectly rehearsed speech. He gestured toward a black duffel bag on the evidence table, the bag they claimed was hers, the bag that had been planted in her car before she ever set foot in that gas station. He moved to a screen at the front of the courtroom and pressed a button. A grainy video played showing a dark parking lot. A silhouette of a woman stood near a car, her face obscured, handing something to another figure. The jury leaned in. The prosecutor turned back to them, shaking his head with theatrical disappointment. This is a classic case of a criminal who doesn't want to face the consequences. She was seen, she was caught, and now she wants you to believe she's innocent. Skylar's chest tightened. That wasn't her in the video. But it didn't matter, did it? The jury already believed it was. The judge didn't care. Her own lawyer seemed to have given up. "Call your first witness, counselor," the judge said, his tone thick with boredom. Detective Sullivan took the stand. He walked with the easy swagger of a man who had performed this ritual countless times, settling into the chair with unshakable confidence. Skylar couldn't bring herself to look at him. "Detective Sullivan," the prosecutor began, "can you walk us through what happened on the night of the arrest?" Sullivan cleared his throat, slipping on his protector of the community persona. "Of course. We had been monitoring suspicious activity in the area for weeks. We knew there was drug trafficking at that location. When we spotted Ms. Monroe making an exchange in the back lot, we had to step in. And when you approached her, what happened?" "She resisted arrest, Your Honor." A beat of silence hung in the air. A wave of nausea washed over Skylar. Lies. Every single word. The prosecutor nodded sympathetically. "So, you're saying Ms. Monroe was not only in possession of drugs but also became aggressive when confronted by law enforcement?" Sullivan sighed dramatically. "Unfortunately, yes. We tried to handle it professionally, but she was uncooperative. We had no choice but to detain her." Skylar couldn't breathe. "Thank you, detective. No further questions." Her lawyer stood, hesitant and weak. "Detective Sullivan, there is no body cam footage of the arrest, correct?" "That is correct." "And no DNA evidence linking Miss Monroe to the contents of the duffel bag?" Sullivan paused, then let a small smirk play on his lips. "No, but we have eyewitness testimony. And in my experience, criminals don't always leave a trail." A few jurors chuckled. Skylar's hands shook with rage. The judge sighed loudly. "Move it along, counselor." And just like that, her lawyer folded. "No further questions, Your Honor." It was over. It had been over from the beginning. The jury filed out, and when they returned minutes later, their faces were stone. The judge cleared his throat, fixing Skylar with a look of finality. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" A woman stood, her expression blank. "We have, Your Honor." "And what is your verdict?" A pause stretched into an eternity. "Guilty." The courtroom erupted. Her mother collapsed in a sob. The cops shook hands, patting each other on the back. Skylar's vision blurred. 20 years. 20 years for a crime she didn't commit. The gavel slammed down. "Sentencing will proceed immediately." She was sinking, drowning in the crushing reality of it all. The prosecution's victory was absolute. They thought they had won. They thought they had her neatly boxed away. But as Skylar sat there gasping for air, she noticed the satisfied smiles on the faces of Detectives Reed and Sullivan. Their eyes flickered with triumph as they exchanged a smug, silent acknowledgement. They had done it again. Another life ruined, another win for them. But they had no idea what was coming. The system had played its part flawlessly. The fake evidence, the false witnesses, the corrupt officials, all moving in perfect unison to destroy an innocent girl. They thought the show was over. They were wrong. Just as the judge prepared to deliver his final sentence, the heavy courtroom doors swung open. A man entered, his presence quiet yet so commanding it sliced through the tension in the room. David Monroe. His black suit was perfectly tailored, his posture that of a man who had faced down horrors far greater than this. His expression was stoic, but Skylar's heart leaped. The most dangerous man in the room was her father. He didn't rush. He walked calmly to the front and handed a classified folder to the judge. The judge eyed the folder, then David, his irritation mixed with a flicker of unease. "What is this?" David let the silence hang in the air before he spoke. Your Honor, before you pass sentence, I suggest you read what's inside. His voice was soft but carried the weight of absolute authority. The judge hesitated, his fingers twitching. He narrowed his eyes, then flicked the folder open. The color drained from his face. The courtroom fell silent, a collective breath held captive. The prosecutor, who moments before had been basking in his victory, now looked like a man staring into an abyss. David's calm was the stillness before a hurricane. The defense attorney, suddenly armed with a weapon he never knew he had, stepped forward and pressed a button. The monitor flickered to life. The first image was grainy, an unmarked police car pulling into a dark lot. Skylar's car was there. She was simply walking into the convenience store. No deal, no exchange, just a girl buying a snack. The prosecutor's jaw clenched as his narrative unraveled. But it wasn't over. The second clip began. Body cam footage. The camera showed Detective Reed behind his vehicle, holding a black duffel bag. He moved toward Skylar's car and, with deliberate precision, slipped the bag under her seat. The evidence was irrefutable. The drugs were planted. Detective Reed's smirk vanished. Sullivan's hand went to his collar, sweat beading on his forehead. "This isn't possible," the prosecutor stammered, shooting to his feet. "Your Honor, I object." The judge didn't even look at him. Then came the final, devastating blow, an audio recording. Reed's voice, casual and confident, filled the courtroom. "We could throw a brick of coke at any black kid in this city, and a jury will still take our word over theirs. It's that easy." The room exploded. The smug expressions on Reed and Sullivan's faces had melted into pure panic. The judge, who had so callously dismissed every objection, was now trapped by the law he had ignored. David Monroe stood, every eye locked on him. His voice was steady, unwavering. "You thought my daughter was just another statistic. You thought no one would come for her. You framed the wrong girl." The words hung in the air, electric. As Reed and Sullivan exchanged a terrified glance, the courtroom doors burst open again. This time it was the DOJ and the FBI and Internal Affairs, warrants in hand. Federal agents moved with swift purpose, heading straight for Detectives Reed and Sullivan. The men who had smirked and laughed in this very room were now silent, their hands yanked behind their backs as steel cuffs snapped shut. An agent approached the bench and placed another file before the judge. A second investigation. Into him. The judge collapsed back into his chair, his world imploding. "You're under arrest for perjury, corruption, and evidence tampering," an FBI agent announced, his voice echoing through the stunned silence. Reed and Sullivan were dragged away, their careers and lives crashing down around them. The corruption ran deep, and now the reckoning had come for the district attorney, for the judge, for the entire system that had enabled them. The judge, his face ashen, had no choice. The conviction is overturned. Skylar was free. Her mother collapsed into her arms, sobbing with relief. For the first time in so long, she could breathe. The courtroom erupted in cheers, but her focus was on her father. He stood calm and steady, and as he reached for her hand, no words were needed. He had saved her. They walked out together past the crumbling remains of a corrupt courtroom, past the prosecutor who looked physically ill, past the detectives being led away in disgrace. As they stepped into the fresh air, Skylar was finally, truly free. But this wasn't just about one case. David Monroe had already launched a massive federal investigation aimed at dismantling the entire corrupt network. The FBI began unearthing years of fabricated reports and false arrests. Skylar, scarred but not broken, knew her journey was far from over. She took legal action, ensuring the men who framed her were held accountable. But her fight became bigger than herself. She started working with activists, her voice amplified by her story. She became a symbol of resilience, a warrior who had faced the system and won. Her story ignited a nationwide movement, with people demanding accountability from the institutions that were meant to protect them. Skylar Monroe was no longer a victim. She had become the system's reckoning. As protests swelled into a nationwide roar, the calls for police reform grew from a murmur to a demand, forcing a national conversation on systemic racism that could no longer be ignored. While David Monroe's quiet influence had turned the tide, it was Skylar who now stood in the storm's eye, leading the charge for real. lasting change. With Skylar's rising profile came a relentless scrutiny of everyone who had played a part in her frame-up. The judge, who had so casually ignored the evidence and rubber-stamped her conviction, was not immune. David Monroe leveraged every ounce of his power to ensure the judge's reckoning was swift and public. It wasn't enough for him to lose his gavel. He lost his name. Public disgrace followed, then charges of judicial misconduct. The man once robed in authority became a cautionary tale, a monument to justice willfully ignored. Skylar Monroe stood tall before a sea of faces at a rally, her voice resonating with the strength of her journey. From the nightmare of a false conviction to a beacon of hope. Her father stood beside her, a silent, unshakable presence. Together, they were a formidable force against a broken system. Skylar's path was far from over, but her focus had shifted from the shadows of the past to the dawn of the future. The echoes of the gavel had once shattered her world, but from those fragments, she and her father had forged something unbreakable. The corrupt officers, the complicit judge, the biased system, they had all tried to silence her, but Skylar was still standing. In the weeks after her release, her victory began to take on a new form. She was not just a survivor, she was a warrior. Now, she returned to the one place that had tried to break her, the courtroom. But this time, she was not the accused. She was the accuser. The multi-million-dollar lawsuit against the city was underway, a public indictment for the false arrest, the manufactured charges, and the years stolen from her. David, of course, had left nothing to chance. He had assembled a legal team not of lawyers, but of titans, the best in the country, with a single objective: to make the city pay a price that would be remembered for generations. In the tense courtroom, the city's defense attorneys tried to minimize the damage, but Skylar's counsel methodically laid out the undeniable facts. The doctored body cam footage, the planted drugs, the buried testimonies. The evidence was irrefutable, a testament not only to the system's corruption, but to David's relentless pursuit of truth. When the verdict came, it was more than just a win. It was an earthquake. The city was ordered to pay a settlement of such staggering proportions that it sent a shockwave through the nation's corridors of power. The message was clear. Corruption would no longer be tolerated. Skylar's victory was not hers alone. It was for every person who had ever been crushed by the weight of a system designed to protect the powerful. But for David Monroe, a financial victory was only a single battle in a much larger war. He now moved from the courtroom to the halls of power, wielding his shadowy connections within the CIA, the FBI, and the Department of Justice, not as weapons, but as tools to forge a new reality. The result was a groundbreaking piece of legislation, a law that demanded absolute accountability. It made it a criminal offense for any officer to knowingly plant evidence or frame an innocent citizen. The blue wall of silence would no longer be a fortress for the corrupt. The law passed with overwhelming support, becoming a blueprint for police departments nationwide. As Skylar stood beside her father, reading headlines that screamed of justice served, a profound sense of peace settled over her, a quiet she had forgotten could exist. It was never just about the money, it was about this moment, the certainty that she had won for everyone. Their final stop was the city's new police headquarters. The old regime was a memory. In its place stood a new chief, a man committed to integrity, who waited to greet them. "Thank you for everything," he said, his handshake firm and genuine. Skylar offered a true smile, one that held the memory of her pain, but shone with the brilliance of her freedom. She glanced at her father, a look of unspoken gratitude and deep respect passing between them. They had done it. They had dismantled the corrupt machine and rebuilt something better. They turned and walked away, side by side, the afternoon sun filtering through the leaves, dappling the pavement before them. And in that quiet, shared moment, Skylar knew. Not just that the fight was won, but that she was at long last truly free.